Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are live in this moment. Pleasure to broadcast our very first HeySuccess talks. And as I explained to our special guest, Mr. Harry Mitsidis, we have already had lots of webinars in HeySuccess, but bringing inspirational and successful people, different experts to share their knowledge, their experience with you, it's quite unique. So it's my pleasure to welcome our first special guest, Mr. Harry Mitsidis.
And it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Harry. Also, Harry is also involved with our company, so he's not only a special guest, so we appreciate his support throughout our journey of helping young people in all over the world. We were amazed with all of those questions we received, so before I start asking questions, I will just briefly introduce Harry, or maybe you, Harry, want to introduce yourself.
I don't know. Would you prefer to introduce me rather? You know, it's very difficult. Yes. It's very, very difficult to talk about oneself, I think. So you know me well enough to say the things that matter, if they do, you know.
So besides our, being a special guest in our very first HeySuccess talks, Harry Mitsidis is my friend. He was born in the UK by South African mother and Greek father. Despite being very well educated, he attended Oxford University for master's studies and MBA in the Netherlands. He decided to create the planet as his classroom. So he set a goal to visit every single country in the world, and he achieved that as the youngest traveler in the world in 2008, right?
Well, not quite the youngest, but yeah, one of the youngest. I was 36 when I did that, so I'm among the 5 youngest to have finished before I was 40. Yeah.
Excellent. And then tell me, yes, it's something else very important which I want to mention and emphasize here. Harry is a founder of the website thebesttravel.com. His passion for travel to this website, where you can see the world split in over 1,000 small pieces, and where people as Harry present what percentage of the planet they have covered by visiting those places. So guys, I suggest you to check thebesttravel.com, and you will find lots of people who traveled to so many countries, but Harry is one of few of them who managed to visit every single country of the world. I mean, there are several hundred of them, and we have one guy here who is ready to share his experience. Okay, so Harry, if I miss something to share about you, please feel free to share it before we pass to these questions.
Well, just one word about thebesttravel.com. It's a really great way to meet people who travel. Some travel more, some travel less. But as the founder, I have really had the privilege in the last 5 years to meet an amazing number of people who've really done fascinating things with their lives. And I think these people have really changed my life as well. They have opened my eyes. So it wasn't only traveling that has given me my worldview, it's also interacting with all these other travelers and other people. So, I urge whoever is listening to consider entering the site, exactly because there's so many big travelers there, and each one of them is like a walking encyclopedia, I would say. So definitely worthwhile meeting them.
And I guess visitors can find stories of those people, right?
Yes. Well, they can find stories. We also have a function where they can follow other travelers and even write to them on the website itself. So if you have a specific question, you can do that. So yeah, I mean, it is interactive, and it's an excellent way of seeing where people have gone. And yes, there are more than, I think, 2,000 to 3,000 stories online, many of which are about little known places. It's not all about the big highlights of the world. So that can also broaden one's mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay, now we are ready to start with these questions, which have been submitted by our users throughout the past 4 weeks. Some of the questions were submitted twice or even 3-4 times. So Harry will answer them once, of course. So the first is how Harry came up with the idea to travel to every single country in the world, how the whole notion of visiting every single country started in your own head.
All right. Well, first of all, before I answer, let me thank everybody who sent in questions and took the time to think them up. Thanks a lot. Now, actually, the idea, it wasn't like I woke up one day and said, okay, now I'm going to do the world. It doesn't quite work this way. I think, being a person who was born to two different cultures, from the very beginning of my life, I had a lot of familiarity with different countries. So I grew up in Greece, but used to go to the UK very frequently. My aunt lives in the States. My mother is originally from South Africa. So, there was quite a lot of moving around, and that already influences a person at a young age. So I think what happened is, when I was a student, when I did my MBA, I went to Vietnam to do an internship. And that was a bit of a turning point. It's there that I realized that, there's a really big world around that needs to be explored. And I told myself I want to see as much as possible. I don't think at the time it even came into my head that it's possible to do every single country. This was the time before internet, so there wasn't very much exposure to all these things. Then at some point, I was about 27 or 28, and I realized I only had a few European countries left. I had already done most of Europe, which is not that large. So, then I just said, okay, let me finish Europe's countries. And then when I did, that was relatively easy. So, then I thought, all right, let's try to see as much as possible. And before I knew it, I had been to more than 100 countries. And, I think there's a point when you've done more than half, then you're like, oh, well, all right, now I should go for the whole thing. And that's how it happened, I never really expected or planned to do it so fast, but it just happened that way.
So it wasn't really a big plan which you sat down and decided one day, yes, I will visit every single country in the world. It just was a part of the process of you just self-discovery.
It was a process. It was a process. I think, once I reached 110, then it started becoming more conscious because, I had a list, and then I realized, that I am consciously looking at where I haven't been and planning trips that way. So at that point, it became more of a conscious process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is quite similar to that one. It comes from India and Qatar. So how was the process of conquering the world, visa issues, financial things? How did you organize that part? So if you can elaborate on this question as well.
Well, yes, visa issues, definitely. Well, let me just say that definitely there are visa issues, but I don't think they are the worst ones. Of course, I'm talking from the perspective of a European traveler. And regrettably, I have to say that to that extent, we are quite privileged. So, with an EU passport, we only need visas for a few countries in Asia and most countries in Africa. And I would say there were only about 10 visas that were a bit more difficult, where you needed more time, more paperwork. The others were easy. I think in terms of the planning, obviously, difficulties were finding the time because I did work at the time. So, I had very defined times when I could go, and often I had to do make the best of not very much time, and that can be the most challenging aspect, I think, and it is for very many travelers. And then, of course, there's budget limitations. So, you know, you need to make a reasonable plan. And then another issue, of course, is that if you haven't been somewhere, you can never in advance know how much you want to stay there. I mean, you can never predict if you will or won't like a place. And, you know, so it has happened that I've been to places that I expected a lot of, and that they disappointed me. And then, you know, I had already planned the trip and I was stuck there for days. And you know, I would have preferred to be more free and to move around. So there were a lot of such considerations. I think, though, nowadays, thanks to internet, the planning phase becomes easier. And in a way, it's a joy in itself. So I find that nowadays, because I still do travel, half the fun is planning the trip, you know, and, you know, looking at Google Maps and seeing where things are. So definitely technology has made it easier and simpler to get over some of these obstacles.
And now there is the besttravel.com where they can find the stories from the first hand as well.
Yep.
Also, one other question. How about, you mentioned that you used your European passport, which made the whole adventure much more easier. How about people who may become, this concrete question came from India, let's say. Do you think that it's impossible for them or just more difficult to achieve the same?
Well, in life, really, nothing is impossible. And this is not a cliche. I really believe it. Of course, you know, yes, if you're from a country where you need a visa to go almost everywhere, it becomes more challenging. And then possibly you need more funds, you know, officials treat you with more suspicion. But in these cases, I would always say that, you know, you can always start with countries which are more accessible. You know, I know, for example, that Nigerian citizens don't need a visa for some Asian countries. You know, or it's a visa on arrival or something. So I think one shouldn't use visas as an excuse not to travel. You know, one just shouldn't always say, well, you know, I want my first trip to be to Paris or something. You know, the world is very big, so pick a country that is different to yours. And it doesn't matter if it's a country no one has heard of. I think it may even be better if no one has heard of it. The experience and what you're going to learn is still going to be extremely valuable to you. So, and I think there is no country which needs visas for everywhere. So there are always chances to travel, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this positive vibe you share with our young people that nothing is impossible, and thank you for that in answering this question. Go ahead.
Well, you know how many people, sorry to interrupt you, Milenko, but you know, when I was trying to go to all these countries, countless times people told me, but that's impossible, but it can't be done. And you know, even now, I mean, I never advertise, but if it so happens that people find out, they say, but you can't have done all the countries. It's a joke, right? Or they say it's impossible. Well, no, it's not. So, you know, really nothing is quite impossible.
Excellent, wonderful. Thank you very much for answering that question. The next one is related to your insights, experiences. What have you learned about humanity, people, societies by taking that big lesson of visiting every single country in the world? Something very important here is I have to mention your blog story, which you wrote for us about a year ago. That is one of 3 the most popular blog stories of HeySuccess ever published. It received over 5,000 likes on Facebook.
Wow.
With a Facebook button on the story. And it's quite shocking for many people. There are 3 things which I want you to ask to elaborate more. And people will get a chance to hear more about why you meant that, what you wrote in that article. So the first one is you wrote that the world is completely different than the one which we see, we from living in Europe or Northern America. You mentioned that most of people have never used internet. they don't know what Facebook is. And if you don't believe that, we have just limited number. So can you please tell me more about those differences? Later on, we have questions like differences between the US and Europe. But can you please talk more about this part?
I think, look, I mean, to a certain extent, we are a global village. I mean, clearly more people than before are connected. But I think it's an illusion to think that everybody is connected and that, everyone has flown on an airplane, everyone has traveled to the city, everyone has done, I think a lot of the people watching today are probably students. Nearly everyone may be a student or a recent graduate. That by itself means that you are a minority. And I don't think any students realize that they're actually a minority, not a majority. So, all you need to do is go to Ethiopia and leave Addis Ababa and drive for, I would say, 2.5 hours out into the mountains. And Ethiopia is extremely beautiful. And so this is a really pleasant drive. And the scenes you see at the side of the street make you realize that, probably life there has not changed in any meaningful way for the past 200 years. So what you see is children and young people and mothers walking with their little canisters and going to the village well or to where they can get water. And this can sometimes mean a walk of 5 or 6 or 7 hours. And now this is not even the least developed, because these people know what a car is because they're walking at the side of the road. So obviously they already are familiar with cars. They know that these cars are coming from a city, I imagine. So, but these people, I am quite sure, live without much electricity or any electricity. And I very seriously doubt that they've ever heard of Facebook, let alone dreamt of ever being on a plane. Now, Ethiopia is a country of about 100 million people. And I would say that in Ethiopia, probably about 70%, and that is an understatement, lives like this. Now, if we take all the other countries like Ethiopia in Africa, and then there's many other places which are similar in Asia, less so, but to a certain extent, and even in the Americas, I would say that at least half of humanity, if not more, is not the way that we expect it to be. And I think traveling is what makes you realize this. Obviously, traveling beyond the city and beyond, the amenities of modern life.
Wow, that's really impressive, and that's something that most of our readers couldn't get really, because as I said, people from Europe and Northern America or Asian tigers just think that's by default everyone. How come people have never used internet? But
well,
as you said,
no,
go ahead.
I think it's not that they may even know it exists. I mean, I don't believe that they're necessarily ignorant, but it just has nothing to do with their lives. So, it's not something they would necessarily need or consider valuable,
Yeah. Okay, this, you mentioned just a few seconds ago that it doesn't mean that they're mediocre or indifferent. But there is another conclusion, which you said that you think that most of people in the world are just, indifferent, maybe ignorant, mediocre. They're just not interested to become better. So what's your experience about, meeting people from every single corner of the world? So what do you think about that? Also, you mentioned something also, which was quite shocking as well, is that, the biggest motivation is not love, it's not success, it's a fear. So can you please talk about that human aspect a little bit more?
Okay. Well, let me start from that. And I think that one is obvious. I mean, if you look at recent political developments in developed countries, and I'm not going to name specific names, I think we're all knowledgeable enough to figure it out. You'll see that the political trend in a lot of the developed countries is one which favors nowadays isolation, protection, barriers. Well, these words are all associated with fear of the unknown, with fear of change. And so if the majority is voting for options which present this, and this is in developed countries, then, then obviously I think my opinion is correct. And I think this is the way the world is going to go. I think it's always been this way. And perhaps it is that way because history has shown that no matter how much we advance, we can never get rid of wars. We can never get rid of conflict. So, even though now we're at the most advanced age we've ever been as a planet, there's still more and more wars. And there's more wars now than there were 10 years ago, for sure. There's many more unsafe countries now than there were 10 years ago. And, I fear that this is the way it's going to go. Now, this doesn't mean that you and I, or the people listening, need to espouse this. I definitely do not live my life based on fear. Very, very contrary to that. So I want to be very conscious of the fact that most people, even though they don't realize it, feel that way. I'm aware of this, and then I try to behave in a way that minimizes their fear and at the same time maximizes positivity in myself. So this is the way I see the world. Now, in terms of the other point, which is a bit perhaps unmotivating, when you're in university, you always hear these messages, you can do it all. And I just said, nothing is impossible. And in general, you have these slogans, you're motivated, you're part of a team, and teachers and the whole system tells you can be who you want to be. The sky's the limit, etc., etc. This is all great, but my experience tells me that most people will go nowhere. They will stay where they were born. They will, in most cases, replicate the lives of their parents or their grandparents, finding similar jobs and kind of going around in a cycle. This is not true for everybody, obviously. And again, if you're watching this program, in a way, by definition, you may not belong to this group, because it means you're a person. You like HeySuccess. You're a follower of HeySuccess, which is an extremely strong portal with very strong positive values in that direction. So, already you're in the minority. But looking at the world as a whole, I do think most people are indifferent. I think most people just want to drink beer or get married, have children, have a job, not work too much at the job, sleep a lot. I don't know. I know this is not a very positive message. But, even if I take it from the perspective of someone who looked for interns in the best traveled, I don't want to be critical, but many of the people I worked with turned out to be that, people who were not willing to take initiative, who tried to do the least possible, maximize what they were gaining without really offering that much. Again, with exceptions. So, I have always learned to focus on the 5%. I believe it's optimistic to think that there's 5% which is geared, which follows a theory Y. Milenko, you exemplify that 5%. Probably of all the people I've met, you are the one who is more motivated than anyone to make a difference, make a change, improve both the world and your own position within it. So, but yes, I feel that based on my travels, people are very comfortable in their little lives and they don't necessarily want to see more.
First of all, thank you very much for your nice words for me and for HeySuccess. We really appreciate you honestly speaking about your experiences of dealing with people and meeting people from all over the world. I think that our viewers appreciate that as well, because more true they know about the world, they will be better off when they eventually graduate and when they go to this world to make businesses to work, maybe to hire interns, to hire employees and stuff. So thank you very much for.
You're very welcome.
Okay, the next question, the last part from the blog, which we want to comment, is you mentioned that smile is universally acceptable. It's universally welcomed in all over the world. Also, you mentioned the concept of beauty. So people prefer to see beautiful people, beautiful things. Also, you mentioned there that it was universally strange, if I can say so, that people see you walking alone, that you don't travel with someone else. So can you please elaborate on those three things that you mentioned in your great blog story?
Well, again, I think it's human nature that societies create a prototype of beauty. That prototype may be very different between societies. So, I mean, our ideal of beauty in the West may be very different to what a tribe in Africa considers beautiful. I'm sure it's entirely different, but still, beauty as an idea has existed since antiquity, and I think you still see it today, that everywhere people want to promote beauty as much as possible. Even if you have a tribal festival, they will choose the ones they consider beautiful to dance or to represent, something of that kind. In terms of being alone, very often in my travels, I have found that the people I come across, whether they're taxi drivers or, hotel receptionists or people in national parks at the entrance or at restaurants or anywhere, find it very strange that I'm all alone. And of course, their first question is, aren't you married? And I don't think it ever kind of crosses their mind that I could be married, but I'm still traveling alone. That could never really be possible in their consideration. And I usually answer in a way that protects me, but is not offensive to them. Sometimes I'm not 100% truthful, I'll admit. Often I find I tell them I'm divorced. It in itself then creates an interesting conversation. I find that when I say I'm divorced to a man, then we have a very interesting conversation about women. And it often is quite funny, so they will talk to me about their wife, or if they don't have one, we'll discuss how difficult it is and whatever. So that can be a bit of an icebreaker as well. But yes, I think people in general are used to travelers always being in groups or in couples or together. So being alone does provoke a reaction. Probably less so nowadays in Europe or Northern America, because there's more and more people who are traveling alone. So no one really bothers. But the minute you go off, yeah, definitely being alone is seen as strange. Yeah.
And about the role of smiles, you really believe that, as they say in some countries, if you smile, it will open all doors for you. So do you think that is applicable to every single country?
I think in nearly every country, this is the rule. So, I think universally, smile does break the ice. Even in countries like China, where people, I find that, for example, in China, because there's a big language barrier, people immediately are on the defensive because they're afraid to make a mistake. They do not understand you, you do not understand them. So this immediately puts an element of unexpectedness in the formality of a transaction, which often leads them to feel uncomfortable. And I think there a smile does wonders, especially in China. There is one country where smiling doesn't work at all. In fact, it actually puts you in a weaker position. I actually remember writing it when I wrote the answers, and you thought it was better that I don't mention the name of the country. So I will actually stick with that. I will not say which country that is, but there is one rather large country where smiling is seen as weakness or as an element of stupidity even. So, you know, like, why are you smiling? What's there to smile about? So again, it's a cultural thing. So there, it's probably better not to. Although even there, on occasion, a smile has worked. But globally, for sure, it's the best strategy to approach. Yeah.
So you think that it would be better to not mention that country, but we'll just say it's one huge and big country, if I am right.
Well, it's a very big country. So you know,
Okay.
look at the map. And again,
You will find it. Okay, now this question just came as an inspiration right now. Someone mentioned that one is about language barriers. How did you, I know that you can speak many languages, 5, 6 if I'm right, but you couldn't speak Chinese if you go to China or Japanese if you go to Japan. So how did you deal with language barriers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And indeed, I would say it's one of the main issues with most travelers. Now, I speak a number of languages that cover me in a very broad geographical range. So, you know, if you speak French and Spanish and Russian and English, you've already got a lot of the globe covered. The biggest problem for me, well, obviously, in a lot of Africa, when you go off the beaten track, you're not alone. So, I mean, even there, I have been okay because I speak the, you know, French or English, which is the official language of many countries, even though some of the locals may not speak them. The biggest problems for me have been in Iran. Iran and China, I can say, have been the two biggest problems. But I don't see it as a problem. You know, I see it as an opportunity again. In China, because, for example, well, now with internet, everything is simpler. But again, for example, what you've got to do if you want to go somewhere by taxi is when you have internet access, you need to make a printout, a print screen of the name of where you want to go. Then you go to the street, you hail a taxi, and you show the taxi driver the print screen. So that way he understands where you want to go, because there's no other way to communicate. You know, I mean, you cannot really write Chinese, even you cannot copy it. Most guidebooks, like, you know, Lonely Planet and others of that type, give the names both in English and in Chinese. So like that, you can use the books to get around. Obviously, the downside is that you cannot have unless the person speaks some English. I think especially with Chinese, because it's a tonal language, I do not dare learn it, because, you know, it's not just a matter of saying the right word, you've got to say it in the right tone. And I'm not familiar with that, and now it may end up that what I'm trying to say is completely wrong. In Iran, I found that the people were very communicative anyway. They were so willing to communicate that somehow the language barrier was overcome. You know, sign language, I cannot quite explain it, but you'd be amazed how many political conversations I managed to have with taxi drivers, even though we did not speak each other's language, you know, but somehow, you know, one or two international words such as democracy or whatever that they may understand, and you can develop a conversation. So I think when you're a global traveler, you kind of learn to use words that are global, and try as much as possible. Of course, you do pick up a bit. In Iran, I managed to learn maybe 50 words while I was there. So, you know, the numbers and a few others. So they help in day-to-day dealings. Yeah.
So in terms of languages, do you believe that you have completely different experience or better experience if you go to a country whose native language you can speak? Let's imagine, I know that you can speak Spanish. So if you go to Spain, do you have different experience than going to China?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one cannot underestimate language, because whatever it is, you can only understand the culture when you really get into it. And you only can really get into the culture when you meet people and talk to them in their own language. So English, no matter how universal it is, it's not it, unless it's in England, of course, or the United States, where it's the native language. But I mean, even if you go to, say, Sweden, I still don't think you can understand Sweden 100% speaking English to Swedish people. You get so much more if you can really communicate in the local language. So I think if I had to write a manual, what to do in order to be a global traveler, step one would be, learn as many languages as you can while you're young.
Excellent, awesome. I remember Harry trying to learn Korean before his second trip to North Korea. I'm not sure if that helped, but this confirms what you have just said. So did it help because you knew some words in Korean before you traveled to North Korea?
Well, only very few words. And to be honest, when it comes to North Korea, you don't really have very many opportunities to communicate with people. So I think in terms of travel, North Korea is really specific because you are monitored, you're always under certain control. So your interactions are very well defined. So there, I think that may be the only country where no matter how well you speak the language, you still cannot figure out what exactly is happening, probably. But yes, I mean, we did in North Korea, we were taken to a kind of bar venue where they sold beer. And there were various locals there. I'm not sure that the locals were there, how should I put it, authentically. They might have been pre-selected locals, it's possible. But anyway, yeah, the 5 or 6 words of Korean definitely helped in making them more friendly and more comfortable and feeling that we were friends. But then again, the beer played a big role in that as well.
We received one question when you mentioned North Korea is, so the question was, is it really true what we see through media about poverty, misery, tyranny, lack of democracy? Is it because you visited the country twice? So yes. Is it really like that?
I don't know. I know this sounds like a strange answer, but I cannot answer because I am not sure that what I saw is real. When you're in North Korea, you're not quite sure if what you're experiencing is really what you're experiencing. And I think you can only understand what I'm saying if you've been there or if you go there. It's almost like you're living in a parallel dimension, in a parallel universe there. It's a very strange feeling. To be very honest, I didn't see very much poverty, but this is because again, where you're taken is very limited. So maybe around the corner from what I saw, the people were starving, but I didn't see that. In terms of architecture, the capital is actually very beautiful. Pyongyang is certainly one of my favorite capitals in terms of how it's built and its beauty. The buildings, they're no worse than some other ex-communist cities I've seen, So in terms of architecture, it's no better or no worse than some other cities. So I cannot really judge democracy or not because I do not understand Korean, and a lot of what was going on behind is completely incomprehensible to the traveler there. So I think in terms of North Korea, the best thing is to go, and then you can reach your own conclusions.
Yeah, good advice, good tip. If people dare to do that and behave according with instructions, I think that could work. Okay, the next part of questions are related to your personal preferences. Mm-hmm. So people ask about if you can share the happiest, saddest, weirdest, and the most dangerous places which you have visited. So we can start maybe with happiest. Probably that is one of your most favorite places.
Sorry, which is my most favorite place?
So we would like to, people ask to share the place where you felt the most happy.
The most
Probably
happy.
that is your, yeah, probably that's your maybe most favorite place as well.
Okay. Well, again, before I answer, I think it's very important to say that a lot of factors play a role in this. So one should never underestimate mood. So, I mean, you are, even without a place, so independent of where you are, you have a certain mood, which may have nothing to do with the place itself. It just is the way it is. So if you're in a good mood, the place will seem more beautiful. If you're in a bad mood, even if you're in heaven, it'll seem horrible. So this is one thing. Another thing, the weather does play a big role. So, you know, and that is sometimes something, obviously, it's out of one's control. So if you're in, I've always been in Paris in bad weather. Every time I've been to Paris, it's raining and gray. So, you know, how do I know what Paris is like in the sun when, you know, in 10 times I've been there, it's never been sunny. I guess it's just bad luck. But so, you know, I caution any answers which have to do with preferences to always consider these things. Now, yeah, well, I've been happy in very many places. The truth is that happiness always depends on people. I cannot say that happiness depends on the place. So I've always been happiest in places where I have either met people who have treated me very well, and that has been, you know, uplifting, or where I've been with friends and we were in general very happy, and that led to you know, very happiness. I think possibly one of my happiest travel moments was in Mashhad in Iran. I had the luck to meet some fantastic couch surfers there. And it happened to be New Year. That is our New Year, 1st of January. In Iran, that is not New Year at all. And they really have no idea what it meant to me. You know, their New Year is on the 21st of March. So, you know, I was like, it's New Year. And they were like, yeah, you know, but it was a marvelous experience because of the people, and again there it was also a cultural experience because I feel that I learned so much from these Iranians, and it really my perception of their country completely. So that might be one of my happiest and most memorable travel moments. I think my saddest travel moment was when, or my scariest as well, was when I ended up in jail in Yemen. That was, you know, going to jail is nothing to be proud about. Although I do think that a big traveler needs to experience it. But still, you know, that was very scary, very unclear what would happen. You know, so until the situation was resolved and I was let free, that was very sad. I've had a number of surprising moments. I think it's difficult to name just one. I think the one thing that has consistently surprised me is human kindness and how kind people everywhere have been to me as a traveler. Very recently, I was in northern Yakutia, which is in Siberia, and I was completely alone, and I speak enough Russian to be able to communicate. And, you know, I asked for a guy's help, I'm like, I want to go there, how can I go? To cut a long story short, he contacted his boss. His boss came with another business associate, and they actually took me to this place I wanted to go to 2 hours away. On the way, they stopped for lunch, which they insisted on paying. And then we went to this place, and they organized a tour for me at their expense. And I was just flabbergasted. I mean, this was at the end of the world, really. I was really amazed with how hospitable these locals were. So I think again and again, the greatest gift and surprise from travels is how kind people prove to be. And this is the most optimistic message I can give to you.
Smile did work there.
Sorry?
So the smile did work there.
Yeah, the smile did work. Definitely. Definitely. It did work, yeah.
Okay, people ask, okay, this was the question, what was the most weird experience, the most dangerous place you have visited?
Okay. Dangerous. Well, let me take that. I'm obviously careful. When you want to go everywhere, you don't have the luxury of excluding war zones, but I'm obviously not going to go to an active war zone because that's asking for trouble. I think realistically, the most dangerous place I've been to is Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. I went there in 2011, about 2 months after Al-Shabaab, which are the Taliban affiliates, after they left the town. It's still very dangerous. I mean, anyone who follows the news will see that there are frequent attacks. Back then, it was really dangerous, so I had to wear a bulletproof vest and have bodyguards and go around with them. Nothing happened. So, I mean, the danger was, I cannot say I sensed it in the sense of, anything happening around me. I've once witnessed gunshots in front of me in Panama. And I mean, Panama is not the most dangerous country in the world, but it can be violent. And I just saw a man with a gun running right in front of me. And I can tell you that when you hear gunshots, you're in a split second, your adrenaline goes up, and your heart just goes completely wild, and it takes a long time to calm down. But anyway, I do not actively seek danger, and I do not recommend anyone does. On the other hand, don't believe what you read on the net either, because especially government advice is always too cautious. It's their job to keep you safe no matter what. So they'll end up, if you read too much of that, you'll never leave your house. So just do good research and try your best to take the measures you can to be safe wherever you go.
Excellent. Thanks for answering that question. The next one comes from Austria, and it is, do you feel a global citizen, or rather a citizen of a particular country? To what extent cosmopolitanism as an ideology is applicable in a real modern world?
Okay, that's a very good question. Well, I have to say I feel European. So I have 2 passports. I'm British and I'm Greek. I don't feel I belong to either culturally, but I do very much feel I represent what you can call European values, and I do believe in Europe as a concept. That doesn't mean that I feel out of place in Asia or in Africa or in the Americas. On the contrary, I really enjoy being there, but I still feel that I am not, I cannot be part of that culture. There's too much which is different and too much I would still have to learn or understand. I don't think cosmopolitanism is an ideology as much as a way of life. I think you can choose to live your life as a cosmopolitan, and I think that would mean it would not necessarily mean travel. Travel is possibly just one of the reflections of such a way of life. I think another way of doing it is to know many languages, to meet people from many countries, and you can probably do that in your own town as long as it's big enough, to follow global events, global news, so I think all of these would make you a cosmopolitan person. It isn't limited to traveling as such, although of course traveling gives you a lot of the impressions that you can never really imagine. Reading books is not enough. So I hope I've answered this question adequately.
Perfect, thank you. So the next one is from Nepal, and it says, do you ever regret something or some places during your trip?
Okay. Well, I obviously regret some things I've done. I think people who say I never regret anything, I don't know. I don't trust that. I think we always, because we're human, you know, as they say, it is human to err, and we can all make mistakes in judgment. I think in terms of travel, I don't regret being. I believe that every place has a value. I do sometimes regret having stayed in a place too little or too long. So, you know, as I said before, it's sometimes difficult to know in advance, especially if you're trying to plan how much to spend in a place. But I think one of the things that travel has done for me is that I can find beauty and I can find interest in anything and anywhere. So, you know, even if there's nothing obvious, just look at the people, you know, that they are enough source of interest to definitely make it worthwhile.
Nice, excellent. Coming back to your previous answer, there was one question is, I'm a freshman. What is the first step I should take to become a global citizen like you? You have answered that pretty clearly. There was one question which we didn't cover before. So it says, do you travel alone? How do you feel? How do you deal with feeling lonely during your trips?
Okay. Thank you. Yes, this is another good question. I usually travel alone. Lately, I haven't been traveling alone in Europe. I usually prefer to travel with company in Europe because Europe is, you know, easy enough to travel, and perhaps the travel pace is not so intense here. However, for longer trips and further away, I do travel alone, but that doesn't mean that I am alone. First of all, as I said before, I am a couch surfer. Not always, but sometimes, and that opens up a whole new door to you know, friends and acquaintances from many different countries. Then, in the countries where I speak the language, you know, you can always interact with locals in their own language. So in the whole of Latin America, that is not a problem. Sometimes if I'm traveling with transport, let's say with a taxi or with a driver, the driver himself has so much to say about their life that becomes interesting. Still, yes, one does get lonely. So, you know, if you're traveling alone in places that are not your own, there are moments or periods when you may feel out of place, especially if you don't like a place too much. There might be moments when you want to be home, or you're missing, you know that you're missing an event, you know, and you're like, look at me here, I'm missing that wedding, or I'm missing this, and you know, you kind of have to deal with that sense of loss. But life is always a compromise, you know, you cannot do everything. So for me, I always remind myself that my priority has been travel, and it is to travel the world and see as much as I can. So you know, I think the loneliness doesn't last too long. And you know, if I go to sleep alone, then in the morning I'll wake up and it's a new day, and I'm as geared as ever to see and experience as much as possible.
Excellent. We are enjoying really listening to your answers. There are a few more questions which I will ask you if you don't mind, if you're not too tired from all those questions.
No. Being a traveler also means you're never tired.
I like
you have
that.
to have a lot of energy, and it's never depleted. So you know, you can keep me here as long as you want.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the next one is how Japanese people are different from all other people.
How are Japanese people different? Well,
one specific question.
Look, people are people. I think that we're not really all that different, no matter where we're from. I think in the end, everyone just wants to be happy, and everyone wants to belong. I think these things are global for everyone, no matter where they come from. And then what differs is the expression of this. I would say that Japan is unique in how color is used. I find it very amusing in Japan where, you know, suddenly I'm faced with pink and orange and bright green. And, you know, these are colors that one doesn't often see in other countries. Also, you know, there's something a bit cartoonish about Japan sometimes. And not about the people, but about just the whole ambience to me. Maybe because when I was a child, I used to watch Japanese cartoons. So then when I'm there, I kind of remind myself of that. But I mean, in reality, I don't think the Japanese are that different. And if they are, it's just in being very respectful and extremely polite, especially toward foreigners. I think, and because there it's obvious that I'm a foreigner, I think this is something that has always struck me about Japan, how polite people are.
And the next one is a bit similar. It says, would you rather choose to live in the US over Europe, and why not?
Well, okay, I'll be 100% honest. I would never live in the United States. I don't mean to offend anyone. For me, the United States is not a healthy society for many reasons. It has a lot to see and a lot to offer, and people can be very friendly. But there is a competitiveness about the United States that I find stresses me even when I'm there for a few days, let alone live there. So personally, I would take any European country any day over the United States. But again, although you can quote me on this, please do not take offense at this. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being honest again. The next one is a bit also strategic question. It says, how about huge countries like Russia, Canada, US, Brazil? Did you manage to visit all the regions and states? Are there big cultural and economic differences between their regions and states? And what is part of Russia? Because the question comes from Russia.
From Russia. Okay. Yes. Yes. This is in fact something that I've been doing lately. So I finished the countries in 2008, but that doesn't mean that I had seen all that much. And since then, what I've been doing is going deeper into countries. Yes, I have been to every single oblast or region of Russia, and there are 83 or 85, depending on how you look at them. I've been to all 50 states in the United States. I've been to every province in Canada, and I've been to every province of China. I've missed a few in India, but I will be trying to do them as well. Indeed, I think you understand a country much better once you go deeper into it. This is true for smaller countries as well, but especially true for the big ones. Maybe not so much for Canada. Okay, in Canada, there's clearly a difference between Quebec, which is French-speaking, and the rest of it. But for sure in the United States, and especially in Russia, the differences are striking. I think what I realized about Russia is that it really is or was an empire. And that, you know, when you're in Moscow or St. Petersburg, you see European cities. But then once you go further, you realize all the different ethnic groups that make part of Russia. So, you know, you've got the Caucasus republics, then you have the Tatars in the center, and then, you know, in Siberia, you have some Asian nations, which even among themselves are quite different. In Russia, I like Siberia best. I think possibly because it's vast, you know, and you can almost feel this vastness, the huge distances. Also because it's much more mixed culturally. So, you know, you have a kind of, this is almost a border between Asia and Europe, you know, a fusion. And I think people are friendlier the further you go, perhaps because life is so difficult there and it's so cold. People are much warmer in Siberia, and that's something I appreciate. For sure, I think a person can only call themselves a big traveler if they've really taken the time to know countries deeper. You know, going to one or two cities is not enough.
Cool, excellent. So the colder weather is people are warmer.
Yeah,
There's something
absolutely.
similar which you mentioned in your blog story. You said that so the happiest people you met were among the poorest. So it's really interesting to hear this contrast again from your answers. Okay, the next question goes to, it asks, in the age of globalization, how different is the life in, let's say, Europe and Africa?
Well, I think what I said before about some of the aspects of life in Ethiopia answers that quite well. However, again, a question like this seems to take a very static view of Europe and Africa. I mean, Europe has 45 countries and Africa has 54 countries. And by no means are the different areas in these continents similar. I do think there is a bit of a European way of life, especially in the European Union countries. But again, I mean, how much in common does Greece have with Norway? I'm not sure. And similarly, I don't know how much Sudan has in common with Angola. You know, I think if I look at it very generally, and I'm not quite comfortable with the question, but for sure the way of life is very different. I think both in terms of very basic assumptions of living, there are big differences. Also in Africa, there is a very, very small percentage of people that has a lot of money and power, and a vast amount of people with really nothing. And in Europe, thankfully, I can say in most places in Europe, although there still are gaps, this gap is not as vast as it is in Africa. And then, of course, there's, you know, everything from transport, entertainment, all these things are quite different. I think, of course, Africa is much more family oriented still in general, and you have much larger groupings of people living together or close to each other. So completely different cultures, yeah.
Hello. Hello, do you hear me now? We cannot hear you, we just see you. Do you hear me now, Harry?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So can you please repeat the last? We lost you there when you said Africa is much more family oriented, and then from that moment we lost you. If you can repeat what you have just said, we would appreciate that.
Well, again, I said that Europe and Africa are very, you want me to repeat the whole answer? Europe and Africa are very different. And at the end, you know, what happens is that in Africa, you have people, there's a very wide gap of wealth and power. So there's a small amount of people with a lot of wealth and power, and a very large amount of people with nothing. Whereas in Europe, I think in most countries in Europe, although there still are big gaps, this gap is not so glaring. And then there's many differences in terms of infrastructure, transport, education, and again in terms of the group, how important groups are and families are. I think in Africa, the big groups generally still play a big role. And that is the case both in the North African countries, which have quite a different culture, and the sub-Saharan ones. In Europe, in most countries, I think the role of the family is slowly becoming much less important.
Okay, so we have two more questions, actually three, but two are very similar. The first one says, so it's quite it can be very difficult, but we would like to hear your opinion, is how do you see our world in 30 years from now?
Well, I don't think there's going to be any huge changes, to be honest. Look, I cannot predict the technological developments. In 30 years, maybe we'll have much more in terms of robots or robotics helping us. So, some of the functions of daily life might become much easier. I think for sure things like internet, smartphone, whatever, will become much more global. But in terms of other things, I still think that there will be wars. I still think there will be power struggles. I still think that our cultures will be different. I do not believe that globalization will take over so fast. So I do not think 30 years is such a very, very long period of time to have great differences. And if we look 30 years back, the only obvious difference has to do with technology. So with the use of the internet and how we communicate. This is a big difference. But I mean, in terms of how people live their lives otherwise, they still go to work. Most countries are still the same. People still fly like they did 30 years ago. It's not any faster than it was then. So I don't know if there will be such a big leap.
Excellent. So I hope we'll have an opportunity to experience and see what Harry has just predicted.
Yeah. I will still be traveling in 30 years.
We wish you lots of help to do that. But before we close our session, we have something, I would say a bonus question and answer, and it is very relevant to our audience, is, so how different would you be now if you didn't start traveling 20 years ago and more? And what would you advise to yourself if you were like 20 something now? So what lessons would you share with yourself if you could do that? And if you, okay, you're talking now to most of our audience, which is 20 something. So what would you tell them as you were telling to yourself?
Okay, well, my answer is going to surprise you. Okay, I was a very good student. Okay, I need to start with this. I was a very good student. I studied sociology, and then I did 2 master's degrees in succession. So I did a master's at Oxford in sociology, then I did an MBA in Rotterdam. To when I was 18 and finishing school, I would tell myself, don't study and just go for it. Travel. Take a backpack, don't be afraid, and see where the road leads you. Of course, I say this from the perspective of who I am today. I don't want to make my studies, which were quite significant, seem insignificant. And I'm very grateful for the experience and the people I met. But I think that I almost regret the years I lost when I was younger and more energetic, when I could have traveled so much more. Because now I have realized that as Harry, travel is certainly the most important thing, and what I want to do and what I will be doing. So yeah, this is what I would say to a younger self. Maybe don't study, but learn from what the live world teaches you. Now, having said that, because I know that a lot of the audience are students, maybe you shouldn't take my advice, because again, this is me talking to myself, and I don't think there's that many born travelers out there. I know some, but I mean, if you talk to most people, they may like to travel, but it's very different to like traveling and to be what I can say a professional traveler. Yeah.
Excellent. I think, this answer is very important. And actually, we at HeySuccess we bring what you have just said to reality. We believe that students can study at the same time and travel time because they have plenty of free time, and they can use this free time to travel, do internships, meet other people, go to conferences, and that's exactly what you have just shared. So they shouldn't necessarily drop out of university. They can combine those two things and get all those amazing experiences which you had from all those countries. They will not be able to go to 202 UN countries, but at least 50 is fine.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons I like Hey Success so much, because the vision is definitely one which promotes, it's about making people whole, and I don't think you can be a whole just by studying. You need much more than that, So, yeah, definitely. And again, I am an extreme example, but 5 countries is as good as 190. The idea is to take yourself out of your comfort zone and to experience things that you wouldn't experience in your normal daily life. So this is what travel really offers.
Perfect. I asked all questions which we have received. There were only some questions which asked for your favorite country, your least favorite country. I'm not sure if you want to cover that part because it's quite specific. So if you do want, you can share it now.
You mean my favorite? Well,
yeah, there were lots of such questions, like favorite and least favorite.
Yeah, no. First of all, again, I hesitate to answer these questions because, again, they take a very narrow perspective. I think our world in general is focused too much on the best, the number one. Which one is number one? And it doesn't work so simply. Countries can be beautiful for different reasons. So, you can find a country where the mountains are great, another country where the people are great. And again, how can you compare how great people are? I mean, what is your criterion? It's very subjective and very difficult to say. I think, again, the countries I perhaps didn't like deserve to be revisited. You know what I mean? I feel that maybe I was in a bad mood, the weather was bad, or I had one negative experience and it might have clouded my judgment. So I think only when I have visited every country twice will I think that my judgment is more or less justified. Until then, I reserve judgment. My favorite country is Portugal because it encompasses all the things I look for in one. It is modern enough, but at the same time traditional enough. It has a very strong culture. The Portuguese people are exceptionally friendly. I have been surprised time and time again, and this is always confirmed when I go again to Portugal. So I have never had an experience to the contrary. Then you've got very nice landscapes, some very old kind of medieval monuments. Lisbon and Porto are lovely cities. You have the sea and you have fantastic food. So, I cannot find fault with Portugal in anything. But that doesn't mean that there aren't countless other countries which are great and worth visiting.
Thank you very much for answering that. That, as I said, it was so frequent question we had to ask. I know that it was very difficult to answer it, but I just had to ask because it was so popular question. And thanks for answering that one. And also, I want.
If I may,
go ahead.
Well, my message to all of you is try to not think in that way. Try to not think in terms of favorites. Try to not even think of people in terms of countries so much. If you ask a person, where are you from? You are already trying to put him in a category based on what you feel or you think about that country. I think it's much better to just let things be and experience them for what they are, and not bother about favorite or not. Just take the good things that every place or every person has to offer.
Wonderful, wonderful. So guys, you got one additional tip. Now at the end, I don't know if we missed something. We asked all questions we received. If Harry wants to add something that we maybe didn't answer and you would like to share.
I personally think I got my message across. So I don't know. I mean, as a last message, definitely I want the viewers or listeners who are from countries where they think it's difficult to travel, to consider traveling more in their own country as well. There are many countries which have big cultural differences, and I will take the example of your country, Milenko. Well, Bosnia or Serbia. I think in these countries always want to go abroad, and they end up not knowing their own country at all. So I know Serbia probably better than you do, and probably better than most other Serbians, and I wonder why. So wherever you're from, look at the map of your country, and you don't even need to go abroad in order to be a traveler. You don't even need to spend that much money, or you may find, if you're from Indonesia, Indonesia is an incredibly diverse country, with peoples and regions which have nothing in common. So I think this is the message, that travel doesn't mean you need to go that far. You can go near and you can learn just as much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Harry, for being our very first special guest at HeySuccess Talks. Amazing insight.
It was a really big honor. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I wish the whole series a huge success. I'm sure it will be.
Thank you very much, and I wish to all our viewers to have at least one professor as Harry. I think this world will be much different place, and our young people would learn much more. But let's hope that's going to happen at least to some universities. Thank you, Harry, again for taking your time to talk to us, to answer all your questions, to share your insights and experiences, and that'll be valuable to everyone who is watching, who were watching, and who's gonna watch this episode.
Thank you so much, Milenko, and all the best for HeySuccess.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.